Hi, and welcome to another edition of Truth and Rhythm. This is a show that gets deep in the pocket with contemporary music's foremost masters of the groove. I'm your host, Scott Dr. Goldfine, musicologist and author of Everything is on the One, The First Guide to Funk. If you don't have your copy, get on over to Amazon and pick one up. It also makes a great gift this time of year. Whether you're watching or listening, I thank you, as always, for your continued interest and support. This episode features singer, guitarist, composer, producer Mick Murphy and keyboardist, composer, producer David Frank, collectively known as The System, one of the most successful electronic pop funk acts of the 1980s. Having met each other in the early 1980s while working for the disco funk band Clear, that's K-L-E-E-R, Frank and Murphy first collaborated on a track called It's Passion. That track took off on radio and clubs within weeks of its 1982 release. The subsequent 1983 album, called Sweat, included the title hit, I Won't Let Go, and the R&B smash, You're in My System. Robert Palmer's cover of that song also became a mainstream rock hit. The duo's sparse, hypnotic sound was quite innovative at the time, blending soul, funk, new wave, pop, and electronic music sensibilities. The System would go on to release a total of 5 albums in the 1980s, collecting 7 top 25 R&B hits between 1983 and 1989. Among those cuts were Pleasure Seekers, This Is For You, Nighttime Lover, Midnight Special, the theme song to Eddie Murphy's hit comedy Coming to America, and the number 1 R&B and top 5 pop sensation, Don't Disturb This Groove. Throughout that decade, the duo also composed, produced, and performed on an all-star roster of other artists' work. That includes Mtume, Phil Collins, Chaka Khan, Scritti Politti, Angela Bofill, Billy Idol, Billy Squier, Steve Winwood, Michael McDonald, and Nona Hendryx. After a hiatus during the 1990s, the System returned in 2000 with arguably their funkiest album yet in ESP. After another protracted absence, Frank and Murphy delivered their most recent album in 2013 called System Overload. That found them returning more to the original System sound. In this deep dive interview, the guys spill the beans on the System's entire story, including the albums, tracks, performances, challenges, successes, creativity, fun, fulfillment, and even new music coming up. Like many, theirs is a tale of years of groundwork and hard work being laid before they became what appeared to be an overnight sensation. They joined Truth and Rhythm from their respective home studios on the left and right coasts. No need to break a sweat, just sit back and enjoy, and stick around for a little keyboard noodling before it's all said and done. Now it's time to turn on the System. Welcome once again to the Truth and Rhythm Mothership, where today I'm joined by singer-guitarist Mick Murphy and keyboardist David Frank, the dynamic duo who comprised one of the most successful electronic pop funk acts of the 1980s, none other than The System. Guys, welcome. I'm so glad you could join me today. How's it going?
Scott, thank you very much. Great to meet you.
Can we call you Dr. Funk?
We've got David there, and here we have Mick.
Yep. Can I call you Dr. Funk?
Hey, Dr. GX is what they call me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, Mick, where are you coming to us from today?
I'm in New York City. New York City, East Harlem, New York City.
All right. And how long has that been home for you?
Oh, well, New York's been pretty much home forever, but East Harlem probably 20 years. Yeah, long time.
And David, you're the West Coast, right?
Yeah, I'm West Coast. I'm in Topanga Canyon, which is kind of near Malibu and LA. So I've been here about 20 years, but you know, I lived in New York before that for 14 years. Yeah.
Yeah, both New Yorkers. My roots, I was born in Los Angeles, but my entire family's from New York, so that's where my roots are too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So before we start rolling here, I mentioned, what a big fan I am, going all the way back to the first album. I was a DJ from the late 70s through the 80s and 90s. And you guys were a cornerstone of a lot of that music I used to keep the dance floor moving and and keep the people happy. So it's a thrill to have you both on.
Cool. Great.
That's great. That's great.
So with that, we're going to hear the system story. You guys ready to jump in?
Yeah, whenever you want.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So let's start from way back, test your memory banks a little bit. And David, I'll ask you first, if you could tell us, so you're from the East Coast, but just tell us a little bit about, how you first got into music.
Wow. I mean, I got into music when I was just a little kid. And I used to sit at the piano and I kind of saw colors, mostly green, as I remember. And when I just like bang around on the piano, I don't know why green. And it wasn't money. It wasn't money. It was green like grass. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I really have been playing music since I was like 4 years old. And I loved all kinds of music and classical music when I was a kid. And then one day a friend of mine had a bass, and he was learning how to play bass guitar. And he was a kid that I knew when I was younger who I didn't like very much. And he had an organ in his house. And I started playing organ with him, and he showed me how I could play like whatever the songs of the day were on organ. He said, "Man, you should be in a band. You're like really good. You should be in a band." So I went home and got an organ, and then I started being in bands. That's the beginning of it.
Very cool. So you saw green. Maybe it was, like green as in a traffic light. Go, go, go.
Yeah, go. That's good. That's good. Yeah, that's a good way to think of it.
What about you, Mick?
Well, let's see. I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, and the town I grew up in, everybody kind of had a band, like a band that played in a garage or, basically like soul, rhythm, and blues bands. So when I was about 12 or 13, my mother's best friend had a son, Robert Fontaine, who had a band called the Soul Shakers. And I could sing, I could sing any of the Jackson 5 songs and pretty much any of the popular songs of the day, because my aunt used to, my aunt's a great singer, and like Aretha Franklin mold. And so she would always put me on the kitchen table and say, "Sing a song, Michael, sing a song." So I got to be pretty good at imitating all the songs that were around during that time. So my friend had a band, and they already had a singer, but I went to hear them rehearse, and I was like, "Oh, can I sing a song?" So they let me sing this song, and eventually the singer who was there kind of went on to other things, and they hired me to be the singer, or I joined the band. So that was like, I was like 13 or 14, and we used to do a bunch of club gigs out in Queens at, these places called like the Club Ruby, and there were all these, during that time, there were a lot of social clubs, and my mother was in a bunch of social clubs. So every time they would have a big engagement, they would let our little band of little kids open the show for these big bands like this. They had Ron Anderson and his band of renown. It would be like a 14-piece orchestra type band. So from there, I just kept being in bands and singing and clubbing, and I really got into it, and that's pretty much my beginnings.
And so at that time, you were doing just popular songs of the day?
Yeah, doing mostly like R&B, James Brown, the Jackson 5. But my ear was always leaning towards more of the rock style, like more of a little bit more crazy rock. I mean, I love Motown, but most of the songs like by the Temptations, Psychedelic Shack, and the songs that were written like Barrett Strong, as opposed to the more smooth soul sound. So I kind of was already angling towards doing a lot more rock and singing like soul rock.
Mm-hmm. And David, what were some of the early influences on you musically, and what types of music did you like to play early on?
Well, I was actually really influenced by a lot of like, Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Chopin and all, because I played that when I was a kid. But then, as I got older and I started to get into rock, which is what I was into first, I would like listen to, copy the solos from The Doors and Grateful Dead and things like that. And many other things where I would learn the records. I'd learn exactly what was on the records on these bands and then play them in my band. And early on, actually, I had a band called what was the name of the band? Simon Pure, I guess it doesn't matter now. But anyway, we were in a battle of the bands early on when I would think I was a junior in high school. And we were a psychedelic rock band. So we did, whatever, all the music of that day, but not really anything that was any kind of R&B. But then there was only one other band in that battle of the bands that showed up that night. And they were like a soul review, and they were unbelievable. And there was this girl singer in the band and a horn section. They had a horn section, and they were a funky band. And I was sitting there listening to them, and they did Respect by Aretha Franklin, and the singer was named Clarice, and she sang it so well, I was almost fell out of my chair. I was like, they're going to win this Battle of the Bands. Well, we won the Battle of the Bands for no reason. No reason except for that we were doing psychedelic rock and we had Dayglow paint or something on or whatever. And after the show, I went up to her and I said, you should have won this. You're like way better than us. And she said, I hate my band. Can I join your band? So that was the beginning of my rock funk combination in my life, because Clarice was a really great singer. And then we started to do more like a combination of soul and funk. So rock and soul, rock and funk.
Never heard that story. I met Clarice.
Clarice. Yep.
So, David, you had some formal training as well, or no?
Say that again?
Did you have formal training on the keyboard as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I had a lot of formal training, a lot of piano lessons.
Yeah.
And lots of times when that I didn't, piano lessons that I didn't like taking that much, but I continued to take them. And I also took jazz piano lessons and all sorts of stuff. But basically, I just sat at the piano in the living room, through my childhood most of the time. That's what I did.
Mick, did you say you had any training or lessons or no?
No, just seriously, a ton of bands and a ton of gigs. We had some pretty nasty funk bands that at a young age we were able to do a lot of shows and work our way up to doing club gigs all on the Eastern Seaboard, like Newport, Rhode Island, Boston, all over the place. So my education is pretty much in grooming funky bands. That's kind of my education.
Did you always feel comfortable performing in front of people and on stage like that?
Oh yeah, I was on fire as a kid. I really was. All the bands we had were really great live acts. We that was kind of what got us hired all the time, was we really had a great show band.
So correct me if I'm missing some pieces of the puzzle here. You can fill them in. But as far as I understand it, the two of you met through the group Clear somehow. Is that correct? Or what were the steps leading up to you guys meeting each other? Let's have David jump in on that one.
Okay. Let's see. You know what? I can't remember exactly whether I met Clear before this or not. I don't think I did.
No,
I think that what happened was I had one. Someone gave me Kashif's number. We all know Kashif. And I called Kashif and told him I needed I wanted to substitute for him if he ever didn't want to do a session.
Yeah.
So he was a really nice guy, Kashif. And one day, out of the blue, he called me back, and I talked to him for a long time, and he never heard me play, but he sent me to do a sub for him at a big recording session with a group called the Ritchie Family, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a guy, and while I was doing that, I was so nervous. But I went and I did the gig, and there was a guy sitting behind the console with the kind of boss guy, and that was Mike. And I looked back there and I saw him, and I believe that's the first time I ever saw you, Mike. Is that correct?
No, well, I can go back further. coming up to Clear, Dennis King, who was chief mastering engineer at Atlantic, was my mentor. Like when, through the band days, when I had bands and we were starving, we were trying to get signed. So after school, in junior high school and high school, I would go to Atlantic Records after school, and he'd let me hang out because he lived not far from where I grew up. So I would go hang out with him in the studio, see all these different acts recording. I mean, really like some great people, like the Stones would be walking through, Eric Clapton, and I would just hang out, and then I would catch a ride back home with him. So he had a group he was working with called Clear, and he got them a record deal at Atlantic. And because he was so busy and he knew me and he had kind of groomed me, he said, Mike, could you road manage the band for me? Because, I can't leave. I'm always busy. So through him, I started road managing bands. So one night he called me up. He said, hey, we're going to go see this singer on the Upper East Side, some singer. He didn't tell me anything about the music, but it ended up, I say Frank Sinatra all the time, but really he was doing kind of that kind of music. And David was the keyboard player. So I said to Dennis, I was like, well, I'm not so sure about the singer, but the keyboard player is great. I mean, he's really good. You should get him in Clear, because at the time Clear was looking for keyboard players. And I think they called you for an audition, and you came in to audition, and you got the gig, and you had to wear the smelly fencer outfit.
Right.
So David never knew I was in a band. I mean, I worked for this, I had bands and we were really good, but we just couldn't get a record deal. So I was like, maybe I don't know enough about the music business. So this guy, Fred Petrus, who had Little Macho Music and Change and Luther Vandross, he came to town looking for a band to front as one of his recording acts, because the records that he recorded as bands, the bands didn't really exist. So he was going to hire my band, which was called Jack Sass at the time, to be Peter Jacques' band, which was this big, huge band in Europe. So I met him, and he kind of liked me, and he asked me about other musicians in town, who were the best musicians, what club should I go to. So he kind of took me under his wing, and I eventually ended up helping to run his company here in New York. And that's kind of where David and I met at that point, because he would be away and he would send me to the studio just to make sure things were getting recorded, and it was that kind of thing. And that's when I met David in that manner.
Right.
For those viewers who don't know, Clear, KLEER. Yeah. And they were kind of a pop disco R&B act in the late 70s, did 3 or 4 albums, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They had moderate success, I would say, right?
Yeah. Well, keep your body working till you feel the beat. That one.
Yeah. And they had a couple of tracks that got sampled that were used a lot by West Coast hip hop funk bands. There were a couple that did actually better as samples than they did actually on the records that they made.
Right. So we sort of met through Clear, but we also, there was kind of like a couple other connections there, I guess, that we had. I can tell you the one story when I did, Mike said, well, I didn't really know that whether Mike sang until he called me up. He knew that I had gotten a drum machine, a DMX, an Oberheim DMX drum machine. And he called me up, and he was doing a project with these Italian guys. And we went to their, and he asked me, would I be interested in coming along, and helping out with the drums. So I brought the drum. He picked me up in a van and took me over to these guys' apartment. And the 2 Italian guys had a great studio. They started fighting. They started yelling at each other in Italian. And they were screaming and yelling. And Mike I thought that he was embarrassed that he had brought me into this. And I was kind of thinking, what am I doing here? And he started to sing. I was doing a beat like on the drum machine, and he started to sing. And I thought, wow, I love his voice. Wow, he's incredible. And I thought to myself, wow, he's got an incredible voice. So that's the first time that I realized that he did that. I don't even think we ever did the project at all. I don't think that they recorded. I think we left. Yeah, we left. Mm-hmm. But then I realized that Mike was great. And then that sort of set us up for our meeting. And Mike, you can go on from there if you want.
Yeah. So then, actually what's great is I think David and I were both really busy in New York trying to circumnavigate the scene and trying to plug things in. And So we kind of kept crossing paths anyway. One evening, he calls me to his loft in the music building, which he shared. I think you shared it with Madonna, a bunch of other musicians or whatever. No, Madonna.
Madonna was upstairs, but
right.
Yeah.
So he calls me over. He says, I have this studio time that I bartered, and I have this track, and Madonna wrote something to it, but I don't really, I don't want to do it this way. Would you listen to it and see if you can come up with any ideas? And the track he played me was In Times of Passion. Now, look, I had been in.
It's passion. It's passion.
It's passion. Well, In Times of Passion, it's passion.
Yeah.
So I had been in bands, funk bands, and the drummer was always the problem. Like the drummer didn't show up, the drummer would show up late. So at some point towards the end of the funk bands, I had proposed, hey, why don't we just use a drum machine like Kraftwerk? And they were like, nah, no way. So when I met Dave and he played me this track, It's Passion, I was like, this is exactly what I've been waiting to hear. I mean, exactly. It was exactly what I was hoping, that it would be. So he played me the track, and I kind of started singing over it, something about the in the chorus, but I didn't have the verses together or anything. So he said, great, we're going to record it tomorrow. So I went home, I wrote the lyrics, wrote the melody, and he picked me up from my mother's house in Queens in his Volkswagen Squareback, which was like full of keyboards and stuff in the back. And we went to the studio in Long Island. And where was that studio in? Like
it was Bolognese Studio.
Yeah.
Blue Bolognese.
Yep.
And it was on Jerusalem Avenue.
You're right.
In Long Island. Yeah.
So we get there probably about 11 o'clock. Start plugging in, and I don't think I didn't even sing him the whole song yet. It was just like what he had heard the night before. So he cut the track. Probably took about 3-4 hours to cut the track, plug everything, and record it. And then it was my turn to sing it, and it just came together like magically in one day. From like 11 o'clock till I think we ended up getting home in the wee hours of the morning, right? Like
because we mixed it. We mixed it too that day. We actually recorded it. I had been working on the track for a long time, honestly, but for like probably a month, but
you could tell it was a lot of, because of what the sequencing was, it was like you could put little pieces together to make these longer sequences. And I could tell he spent like a lot of time creating some of the sections. I mean, you listen back to it now, you can, you really realize what it took to make it. So we get home, he drops me off, maybe it's 1 or 2 in the morning. My room is my entire basement of my family's house. And I go downstairs, and I had a really great stereo. I had like, Macintosh amp, big power amps, because I had sound systems. So I'm blasting this record in the basement, and I'm like, this is it. This is the song. This is what I've been waiting for all my life. So at 9 o'clock, I get up. I call Dennis King. I'm like, Dennis, I work with David. We made this song yesterday. Could you make some test lacquers? Because I think it's really a hit. So he says, yeah, sure, come. So I got there about 10 o'clock. He cut 3 lacquers, one of which I have on display. I have one for you also, Dave.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I have them still. I found them the other day. So he made the lacquers, and I knew 2 people in the music business because of this work I did with Clear. Well, I knew more people, but these guys always said, hey, if you ever come up with something cool, bring it to me. One was this guy, Jim Delahant, who was Jerry Greenberg's, I guess he was vice president, right?
Yeah.
And Ray Caviano, who had RFC, which was a label that Fred Petrus dealt with because of the group Change. So I went to Ray Caviano because Delahant wasn't in yet. I played it for him, and he said, oh, you got a deal. If you want to do this, I'd love to have this record on RFC. I'd love to have it. I said, well, I have one more meeting, and I'll come back to you after I have that meeting. So from there, I went to see Jim Delahant at Atlantic Records at like 11:30. So he comes in. I'm like, yeah, I want to play this for you because I think it's something really great. He listened to about 30 seconds of it, and he says, wait a minute, I'll be right back. He walks out a door, and back in behind him comes Jerry Greenberg, who for me was a big hero because, He was the youngest president ever at Atlantic Records. I kind of grew up around Atlantic Records and Atlantic Studios. So here he comes in, nods at me. He sits in a chair, turns around with his face away from me. He listens to the record. About a minute and a half in, he turns around with this huge grin on his face and he says, "You got yourself a record deal." So this all happened literally in 24 hours. So I got on stairs to the phone booth. We're talking the age of the phone booth. No cell phones, the phone booth. And it was a phone booth right outside Atlantic Records near Goody Music Store. So I called David. And David's like introspective as he always is. He's like, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about the title. I'm like, David, we have a record deal. We have a record deal. And true to form, we had a record deal. And I think that record came out like in November, right, Dave?
It came out right.
When was
Wait, I'm hearing an echo. It came out within a month. It was on the radio of when we made it, Scott. It was on the radio on WBLS and in LA.
And all the clubs, like all the clubs.
You were talking the latter part of '82, right?
Yep. It was actually, we made it in May. It was on the radio in June.
June of '82.
June of '82.
Yeah. Wow.
And I mean, it was a huge club record. I mean, a lot of times now, people, they're like, what was the R&B chart number? What was the pop chart number? But for us, it got us to play a lot of clubs in Miami and New York. And sometimes we'd do 3 gigs in a night. I mean, it was really, it really came at a time when we needed that boost of confidence, like to show us that we actually were doing something different and that it would work.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a fantastic story. You guys must have been beside yourself with excitement at that time.
Very much so.
So when you first heard that,
I
always like to ask, what was it like when you first heard it on the radio?
It was just a fantastic feeling to hear it on the radio. I just wanted to mention also one thing, that at the time it was really the beginning of that kind of electronic music, which was a great thing for us, that we actually, like Mike said, this is the thing I was waiting to hear. At the time, the DSX sequencer, which I showed you before, like I panned around the room and I showed you, that it's like a separate unit, and the DMX drum machine and the Oberheim, that was like a way of actually making kind of like an entire record like contained that way. And it was the beginning of that, and also the beginning of a new sound. So we were really, fortunate to be like right at the forefront of that.
Yeah,
and have the equipment and to have the gear right at that moment, to get it to actually utilize it, then it was a great thing.
So were you always kind of a bit of a gearhead, David?
Well, I had a lot of synthesizers, but I'm more of like a chord. I'm more into like chords, playing music. Here's my fingers. I'm into playing the chords, but I'm into gear too. Yeah, I am. And it was just like Mike said, it all like came together for us like at the right moment, and it was a great thing to be right there, in living in New York at that moment when that could happen, and where if we got the music right, it could happen, which was wonderful.
Was there anyone, David, that kind of influenced or inspired you on the electronic side of keyboards?
Well, I was inspired by many people. Like I did, I would say George Duke, Bernie Worrell, and they weren't particularly sequenced album. They weren't done with what microprocessor. We'll call them computers. We'll call it computer music, okay, for now, even though they weren't actually in the computer. But they weren't actually done that way. But okay, so Bernie Worrell, I was inspired by all kinds of hard funk. Just like Mike, I was never really into the soft stuff that much. I mean, I appreciate a lot of the smooth sounding vocal groups, but I was into Chaka Khan and Rufus. That was like a huge influence on me. And I used to practice Stevie Wonder, Boogie. If I was to say one thing that influenced me the most in my life, it's the bass line of Boogie on Reggae Woman.
Yeah. Yep.
and Earth, Wind and Fire. I gotta say, the bass player. Oh, what's his name?
Verdine White.
Verdine White.
Yeah, Verdine. Yeah.
Same here. It's like even we have very like minds in terms of this musical influence. Now I'm a little bit more towards the European in some ways, like the first Kraftwerk album. I mean, kind of esoteric stuff that I like blended in, because for me, like funk was all around me. And so I was kind of geared toward listening to a lot of the music that was coming out of Europe at the time, a lot of music that was coming out of London, Ian Drury and the Blockheads, Gary Newman. I was loving those sounds.
Yeah, me too. I love Gary Newman. Come on, that's like, and Wright, Gary Wright.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Gary Wright.
Yeah, you guys were right there, definitely at the leading edge of the rise of electronic pop music. So tell me how it progressed from there in terms of developing your first album.
Well, okay, so we have this first song that did really well on the dance chart. So Jerry comes back to us, Jerry Greenberg, and says, hey, we need a second single. I think we made a second single, Sweat, right? Sweat was our second.
No, I don't know. No, we didn't. We hadn't made one yet. We were working on a couple of the other songs, like Stand Up and Cheer, but they weren't. We didn't play those for him.
Right.
We didn't play them.
He comes and he says, okay, I want you guys to make a second 12-inch. Now, I had seen from my experience kind of hanging around Atlantic that they can like drag you out a single at a time. So I said to him, no, we don't want to make a second single. We want to make an album. And he said, well, okay. I mean, there were a couple episodes between there where, like the time when they tried to get an Atlantic R&B producer to be our producer. If we signed to the label, we had to sign to the R&B guy. But we were like, one of the things we definitely wanted, we had to produce ourselves. We couldn't have a producer because we knew what we wanted. But Jerry said, well, how much would it be to make a record? And it was I guess I spit out some amount that I thought we'd be able to make.
No, Mike, you said how much would you give us to make an album?
Right. You're right.
That's right.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
That's right.
And he said a number. I think I asked for a little bit more, and he said fine. And we went to studio. I think, David, we had Sweat, Stand Up and Cheer. What other songs did we have at the time?
Well, I don't remember exactly which ones, but we did them. We just made an album, after that. And of course, You're in My System was the linchpin of it, of course. Yeah. So
I mean, I think we were also still working on other things after that 12-inch came out, because there's no guarantee we were going to get a record or anything. So I think we would like meet in the evenings and kind of work on the songs at the loft. Is that right, David?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. That's right. We did.
One night I went there. I remember You're in My System, and David would always preface everything by saying, I wrote this, but I'm not really sure. I don't know. Maybe the bass line's not so good, or I don't know. It's because compared to a lot of the things that were on the radio, our sound was always a little bit more twisted and weird. The feel of it, the drum feel, all that. So he played You're in My System for me, and I'm like, don't change a thing. Don't change anything. The difference was, I think, David, you had the chorus somehow as a bridge, and the verse. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was like, let's flip this around. And I think we wrote You're in My System like in 3 hours.
We did. We wrote it really quickly. I actually had the bass line to the verse, and then we wrote the chorus, bass line, and all that stuff, just sitting there. We just did it, and then you wrote the melody and the words, and it was done in 3 hours. That song was very quick.
And when we heard that, we knew we had a great song. I mean, I don't think we had any doubt about it.
Right.
Of course, the record company, because they paid so little for the record, it could be a thing where they would like, we don't have to promote this much. So Robert Palmer came a-calling through Atlantic because he heard You're in My System in a club in Paris. And of course, they were like, no, you should let him cover it. You should let him cover it. Thinking that, of course, we're not going to have any kind of a pop impact in the pop world. And so he covered it. In some ways, it boosted what we did, but in some ways, maybe it detracted. But, you know, in the overall, it got us a much more worldwide fan base.
Right.
So how did you guys actually, you know, you came up with this, with the songs, how did you actually produce them as a final recorded product? You know, did you lay out all the music first and then you came in and did the vocal overdubs, or how did you guys work on that?
Well, we had demos, basically, on cassette demos of the stuff, right, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I would work in the studio. A lot of times, the track ideas would come first, and I'd play Mike a whole lot of track ideas. You know, maybe just a verse part, or maybe not the whole thing. You know, not the entire track, but parts of it. And then Mike would like zero in on ones that he liked and write the lyrics and the melody to the tracks. And then we would go in and we would make demos of them, go in the studio, and then flesh them out and record them and do all the vocals and the harmonies and everything, just sitting in the studio doing it.
Yeah.
Did you change much up in the studio, or you just kind of knocked it right out?
Did we say that again? Did we what?
Did you change much in the studio, or did you just kind of knock it right out from the demos?
I think that first album
varied.
kind of just went straight at it, right, Dave? I mean,
we pretty much would try to just knock it out, especially on the first album. You know, just go in, and we were pretty sure of what we had and what we, you know, that we liked it. But we also weren't above, like, you know, doing something different in the studio. And we did a couple songs. I think we did a couple songs in the studio, like "Now I Am Electric," the last song on there. We did lots of overdubs and stuff in the studio, and did, you know, and then on other albums we did even more things sometimes in the studio. But we always had a good idea of what we were, you know, it'd be like, you know, I'd say an average of 75% there, let's say.
So that first record, I mean, those tracks that we just talked about, that started off the record. It was Sweat, You're in My System, and It's Passion, just boom, boom, boom. Yep. And all those tracks were long too. They were extended and, you know, ready-made for the dance floor. So was it intentional that you made sort of the extended versions that went right on the record?
Well, we had like a budget of X dollars. And I think that Sweat album, what did it have? 6 songs or 7 songs on it?
Seven songs.
So they had to be longer, Scott. Hey, Scott, we had to. It's like the gig, you know, the gig when the band only knows 6 songs, so you keep vamping on the breakdown. Give the
right.
So you felt that "You're in My System" was going to be a hit, but when it really took off, and that record was selling platinum, and you're reaching these heights of success, you know, how did that feel? And did you kind of have to pinch yourself?
Okay, well, can I start with that?
Yeah.
I remember hearing it for the first time I ever heard it on the radio, which again, by the way, was within a month of when we turned the album in. Within a month, it was on the radio. We finished the album in, I think, November.
Yeah,
and by the end of November, the beginning of December, it was on the radio before Christmas, you know, before they would stop the playlist advances. And I was sitting in my car I had to wake up at 7:30 in the morning to move my car from one side of the street to the other for alternate side parking, because I couldn't afford a parking lot space, right? And I'm sitting there, and they go, and the DJ, and I hear "You're in My System" on the radio, and I'm sitting there by myself, you know, completely exhausted, freezing in my car, waiting for it to be 8 o'clock so I could leave the car there and not get a ticket. And I hear the DJ came out afterward. I don't know if it was Pat Prescott or someone on WBLS, and she said, "That's the system. That's going to be a big, big song for them."
Yeah, I remember.
Still hear me?
Hello?
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you're kind of cutting in and out a little bit, but.
No, I got a call, but that's okay. All right. So what I was saying was that Pat Prescott, or the DJ, a female DJ, came on and said, that was the system, and that is going to be a big hit for them. And I took my car and I bought myself a parking space at a parking lot.
Thanks to Pat
right
Prescott,
after that.
Wow, you're living the high life right away.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right away renting, and I actually left the car there, and I came back months later and it had flat tires. But anyway, that's okay.
So Mick, for you, I mean, you kind of envisioned this for all those years, right? So you finally hit the big time. How did it strike you?
Well, it was great. I think one of the things you left out of the story, the big time. Okay, so our first single comes out, and we're touring with Clear in the South somewhere. And
Oh, right.
I'm a glorified road manager / get anything done by any means necessary, even if you have to carry a giant Ampeg SVT cabinet by yourself in the mud. So I'm carrying this huge cabinet to the bus because the equipment would go into the bus. And Dave
in the rain.
Yeah, in the rain. It's like a torrential rain in South Carolina. And Dave is knocking on the window. He's like, "Our record's on the radio." And they were playing It's Passion, right?
Yeah, It's Passion. Yep. That's
Passion.
right.
So yeah, in some ways, I kind of was hoping that this moment would come, and I wasn't so surprised as I was. Okay, let's get ready for let's get ready for what's getting ready to come. Like, let's get our ducks in a row, because things started happening really quickly. I don't think we had a manager. Do we have a manager?
No, we had no manager for the first album.
Yeah, we had no manager, and also we were getting lots of calls to work other records. And I think right after the Sweat album came out, we created the group Attitude. And because the guy, Ray Cabby in RFC, was like, "Man, you should have brought me that record. You know, you were going to bring me the record back. Make another record for me." So we kind of invented this side band called Attitude. So we were working a lot in the studio. And I'll be honest, it was like one of those times, David and I talk about it a lot, like we didn't really take time to smell those roses because we were like so busy, you know, jumping on projects. We did Beach Street, I think, immediately following that. And a bunch of other soundtracks for films, like kind of all within that first year.
Right.
So to what extent did you guys go out and tour in support of that first record?
We did.
Yeah,
what tour did we do with that? We kind of.
Well, we did actually go out and tour, and I would say we toured for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And how many piece band did you go out with?
4 pieces. Paul, Chris, David, and myself.
Right.
Oh, here's another good episode. I think this was during You're in My System, because we wanted to go out to LA and get on Soul Train. We want to be on Soul Train. Remember that, Dave?
Right. Yeah, I remember.
So You're in My System. It was like number 10 on the R&B charts forever. In my recollection, it was like 10 weeks. I don't think I'm wrong. It was like top R&B. Right. So we asked Atlantic Records, "Hey, you know, we want to go to LA and, you know, try to get on Soul Train." So they kind of were very resistant to it for some unknown reason. So we booked ourselves at the Club Lingerie, right, Dave?
Right. We actually got ourselves tickets to LA.
Yeah, we got tickets for the band to go to LA, and then Atlantic jumped on board and they're like, "Okay, we're gonna get you on Soul Train while you're out there." And I think we did 2 clubs. We did Club Lingerie, and then we did this other club that's probably no longer around, up La Cienega. So that got us even more exposure because we ended up being like pretty much a fixture on Soul Train. We would play every time we had a single out. It seemed like we would, you know, be invited to perform.
Right.
When you guys went out on tour, did you kind of stick right to, you know, the note of the records, or did you guys improvise much? What was your show like?
We pretty much stuck to the record, the way the record sounded. Paul Pesco, the guitar player, had played guitar on. Actually, he didn't play guitar on the first album, so I'm not sure. I can't remember exactly how we dealt with that. Maybe he just played a little extra stuff. But you know, the other keyboard player, Chris, would play parts, and I would play the bass line and a few things, and then we'd also have the sequencers running live. We didn't use tape or anything. We just had the sequencers running, and which was a new thing at that time, a new thing. Yeah.
Of course, that was also right when music videos were exploding. So, you know, how did you guys approach, you know, that part of your your new image and that whole part of it.
Yeah.
Well,
they gave. Go ahead, Mike.
I missed what you asked.
Oh, he asked about the music video, about videos.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, we were still kind of low budget Atlantic. They didn't spend much on us. So I think we kind of demanded that we make a video for You're in My System,
Yeah.
right? It was something like
Right.
that. We were like, we got to make, and I think it was more you, Dave. You're like, we got to make a video for You're in My System. We got to do it. And somehow they acquiesced, and we ended up cutting You're in My System video in Lower Manhattan and then up at Bearsville, Todd Rundgren's place or something. Right, Dave?
Yes, that's right. And it was a pretty low budget video. As you can look at it and you can see that it's a fairly low budget video, like $1,000 or $2,000, something like that.
Probably a lot more than that.
Oh, was it? I thought it was.
Oh God, yeah.
But the record was so hot, I mean, it got good rotation anyway.
Yeah, it did. It really did.
It did.